Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. For those of you who have just logged on, we have already completed a sound test, and a big thanks to everyone who helped out with that. First, I want to introduce ourselves. My name is Holly McHugh, and I'm a marketing executive here at Thesaurus Software. And also joining me to present today's webinar are Rachel Hines, who is the Marketing Manager at Thesaurus Software, and Karen Bennett, who is the Chief Commercial Officer here at Thesaurus Software. With less than 2 weeks left until the TWSS Reconciliation deadline, first we are going to summarise what employers need to do before the 30th of June, as there is still a lot of employers who haven't completed the reconciliation process. Next, we'll look at the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme, which continues to be a requirement for many businesses. On the 1st of June, it was announced that the scheme would be extended until the 31st of December 2021. So we'll also look at the extension of the scheme and some changes that were introduced. Fortunately for many businesses, lockdown restrictions continue to be lifted, and so we'll look at top tips for managing employees as lockdown ends and as you return to the workplace. Finally, at the end of the webinar, we will have a questions and answers section where we will answer any questions that you may have. For our questions and answer session, Rachel will be back on to read out the questions, and she will also be joined on by Audrey Mooney, who is the Customer Support Manager here at Thesaurus Software, and Laura Murphy, who is our Chief HR Officer. If you have any questions, you can type them into the questions box on your control panel at the side of the screen, and we will try to get through as many questions as possible. Just to note, we have a lot of attendees on today's webinar, so we won't have a chance to answer every single question. This webinar is being recorded, and all attendees will receive an email later today with a link to the recording, so it's no problem if you do need to leave at any stage. Also, in the email later today, there will be a copy of the presentation slides that we are using today, or you can also download the slides right now if you wish on the Handouts tab on your control panel. We will also include some useful documents and additional resources in the follow-up email later today. Now that all of the housekeeping is out of the way, we may as well get straight into the webinar, and I'm going to pass you over to Karen to start off with the TWSS reconciliation.
Thanks, Holly, and good morning, everyone. So I think at this stage, or at least I hope, that you all know what the TWSS reconciliation process is. So we're not going to go into it in too much detail today. But I think we're all glad to see the back of the TWSS. If you are unsure about what the process is, you can watch back on our previous webinar, which took place last month. Earlier this year, Revenue compared the total subsidy amounts paid to employees against the subsidy amounts paid to the employer. This enabled Revenue to determine the amount of TWSS owed back to Revenue from employers. On the 22nd of March 2021, Revenue issued reconciliation balances to most employers, and this information is available in ROS. The reconciliation balance is based on the actual information provided to Revenue late last year by employers. Approximately 44% of employers who availed of the TWSS do not have any balance to repay or due further TWSS payments from Revenue, while 56% of such employers have a reconciliation balance to repay. By the 30th of June 2021, employers must have reviewed their reconciliation information, made any necessary corrections, and have accepted their reconciliation. So far, 38,000 employers have completed the reconciliation process, meaning there is still 43% of employers who need to take action within the next 2 weeks. We would strongly advise that employers check their reconciliation balances as soon as possible so they have enough time to review the amounts and make any amendments if necessary before accepting the reconciliation amounts. If no action is taken by the 30th of June, the reconciliation will be treated as final. If the subsidy paid information is not provided by the 30th of June 2021, then Revenue will take action to recover all TWSS payments made to the employer, plus related interest charges. If an employer has reported all subsidy paid data before the 30th of June, but has not accepted the result of the reconciliation, a notification will be issued for any amounts due to be repaid to Revenue per the reconciliation calculation, and normal collection and enforcement processes will begin. Now I'll pass you over to Rachel.
Thanks, Karen. So next we're going to look at what you need to do to complete the reconciliation process. After you have received the ROS inbox notification telling you that your reconciliation information is available, you can access this in ROS under Employer Services. The reconciliation screen will reflect your current reconciliation position, and the information shown will vary depending on the information that you have submitted and your balance. If you have reported the subsidy paid information on all J9 payslips, the reconciliation screens will show the summary information, allowing the employer to review and accept the reconciliation. However, if you have not yet reported the subsidy paid data for all J9 payslips, you will be given the information on the actions that you need to take. If you have reported the subsidy paid information on all J9 payslips, then the reconciliation screens will show the summary information, as you can see on the screen. So here is the total TWSS amount paid to you by Revenue, total TWSS amount payable in respect of your employees, or essentially this is the total subsidy that you were entitled to receive as calculated by Revenue. Next is total TWSS payable or paid by you to your employees, and you can cross-reference this figure with the payroll software, which we will look at later. And finally, down the bottom here is TWSS owed to Revenue, or if there is TWSS owed to the employer, then this will be displayed in place of TWSS owed to Revenue. It's also important to be aware that the summary information does not include any TWSS repayments that you may have already repaid to Revenue in relation to the TWSS. If the TWSS amount paid to you by Revenue equals the total TWSS amount payable in respect of your employees, then this reconciliation is balanced. Also, Revenue are not pursuing companies that owe a balance of under €500, and so if the TWSS amount paid to you by Revenue does not exceed the total TWSS amount payable in respect of your employees by more than €500, then Revenue considers this reconciliation to be balanced, meaning no balance is payable. Further down the screen, you can also download the reconciliation detail CSV file, and this contains a complete record of the TWSS related payslip information provided by the employer at payslip level, and revenues reconciliation calculation. If you are satisfied with the information in the reconciliation result, you should click the Accept Reconciliation button. I'm going to pass you back over to Holly.
Thanks, Rachel. When you accept a reconciliation, Revenue will combine the TWSS reconciliation results with any repayments that you have already made to Revenue, and a statement of account will be sent to your ROS inbox the following working day. If your reconciliation is balanced, by accepting the reconciliation, you will finalize your participation with TWSS. If an additional amount of TWSS is due to the employer, Revenue will process this, and the additional payment will be made to the nominated bank account of the employer. It's also worth noting that this amount isn't automatically refunded. You do need to accept the reconciliation for Revenue to refund the amount owed to you. If there is an amount owed back to Revenue, the employer can pay the amount owed via RevPay in ROS, or alternatively, eligible employers can avail of debt warehousing. For employers already availing of debt warehousing, this liability will automatically be warehoused when they accept the reconciliation. If you think that the information you previously provided is incorrect, and that the reconciliation balance is therefore incorrect, you should review the subsidy paid data previously submitted and make any corrections required. Where you do make corrections to the payroll, you won't need to upload the TWSS reconciliation CSV file to ROS again. These corrections will be reflected on the correction PSR that will be sent to Revenue. This will result in a revised reconciliation balance, which will be immediately available in ROS. Employers cannot accept their reconciliation until all subsidy data has been reported. Therefore, if you have not already done so, you must take action to submit the subsidy paid in respect of all J9 payslips. And you must also report any subsidy payment that was made on non-J9 payslips, regardless of the PRSI class. If you have not submitted the subsidy paid data in respect of either some or all J9 payslips, you will be asked to download the reconciliation details CSV file and identify all active payslips that show an unreported subsidy paid and submit the missing subsidy paid information to Revenue. To rectify this, you simply need to submit the subsidy paid report, and so the reconciliation summary and the reconciliation detail CSV file will be adjusted in real time to reflect this. Back to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Holly. So as I mentioned earlier, the total TWSS paid by you to employees should match the subsidy paid figure on your payroll software. This should have been reported to Revenue using a TWSS CSV file. You can confirm this figure matches by running the report in the payroll software again. So looking here at the Thesaurus Payroll Manager, to view this amount in the payroll software, go to Reports, followed by TWSS Report, and here we just need to enter the date range required. So here I'm going to say the 1st of March 2020 until the 31st of August 2020, and I'll click Prepare. So here you will see a list of all of the subsidy amounts paid to your employees in each of the different pay periods. Here I just have one employee, but if I scroll to the bottom of the report, you can see here there is a new total figure, and this will allow you to check to see if the figure for total TWSS paid by you to employees on your TWSS reconciliation summary matches the total subsidy figure in the payroll software. If the figures don't match, as I mentioned, a correction submission will be required and a new submission made to revenue for that pay period. However, if this figure is correct and one of the other figures on the TWSS reconciliation summary is causing the incorrect reconciliation amount, you will need to contact revenue through My Inquiries. Here at Thesaurus, we have no way of knowing how much subsidy you actually received from revenue, just how much you paid to your employees. Next, I'm going to show you this in Brightpay, and the process is very similar. You can check the amount of the subsidy paid to your employees by going to the Employees tab, then Reconciliation CSV File. Here the dates have defaulted to the entire duration of the scheme, and I'll click Continue. And finally, like with Thesaurus Payroll Manager, you can see a summary of all of the subsidy payments made to each employee each pay period. And at the bottom of the screen, you will see a new totals figure, which you can cross-check with the amount of subsidy paid to employees on your TWSS reconciliation summary in ROS. And next, I'll pass you back to Karen for the EWSS.
Super, thanks Rachel. So that's it for the TWSS reconciliation. We're now going to have a quick recap of the existing scheme, the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme, or the EWSS. The Temporary Wage Subsidy Scheme was replaced by the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme from the 1st of September. And I think we can all agree that the EWSS is a much simpler scheme to operate, to understand, and it is a lot more intuitive overall. EWSS is a subsidy paid to an employer, not the employees, and so it will not show up on a payslip or in my account. This also means that it won't have the same tax implications for employees as was the case with the TWSS, where many employees faced tax shortfalls at the start of this year. So overall, the EWSS is a much better scheme. Recently, it was announced that the EWSS will be extended beyond the 30th of June 2021 until the 31st of December 2021. Under the EWSS, employers receive a flat rate subsidy per employee per week, depending on the employee's gross weekly pay. For the first few months of the scheme, the subsidy was payable was €203 or €151.50, depending on the employee's gross weekly earnings. However, in October, the subsidy rates increased, ranging between €203 and €350. The subsidy is not available for employees whose gross weekly earnings are less than €151.50 or greater than €1,462. When the scheme was extended until the end of December, it was also confirmed that these enhanced rates will be maintained into Q3 until the end of September. A decision on the rates that will apply from October is expected at the end of August or early September. In addition, the question of an employer contribution to employees' wages under the scheme will be considered for Q4. With the extension of the EWSS, a change was also made to the scheme eligibility. The current threshold of a 30% reduction in turnover or customer orders is retained. However, to benefit more firms, the time period for assessment will be broadened from the current 6-month period to the full 12-month period. Businesses are now required to compare financial projections for the period from January to December 2021 to actual reported turnover for that same period in 2019. Businesses must expect to experience a 30% reduction in turnover or customer orders during this time in order to be eligible for the scheme. For Q3, there are no changes for qualification for EWSS for the childcare section. That is, they do not need to expect that 30% reduction in turnover. Employers must continue to review their eligibility status on the last day of every month to ensure they continue to meet the eligibility criteria. As lockdown restrictions ease, it's important to remember that if you no longer qualify, you should deregister for EWSS with effect from the following day, that being the 1st of the month. As you are no longer eligible, the EWSS markers should not be included in payroll submissions to revenue. Now, if circumstances change the following month and you are once again eligible, you can re-register and claim from the date of re-registration. It is not possible to backdate the claim to include the period of deregistration, as that correctly reflected the employer's expectation at that time. Back to Rachel.
Thanks, Karen. So next is how the EWSS works in payroll software. Where the scheme is being operated, an indicator will be included on the payroll submission to revenue to indicate which employees you wish to claim EWSS for. On receipt of the submission, revenue will calculate the subsidy payable based on the employee's gross pay, the pay frequency, and the insurable weeks. EWSS payments will generally be paid into the designated bank accounts of eligible employers within 2 working days after receipt of the payroll submission. There continues to be a 0.5% rate of Employer PRSI, which applies for employments that are eligible for the subsidy payment. Employer PRSI must be calculated as normal via the payroll, for example on PRSI class A1. Revenue will subsequently calculate the PRSI credit by calculating the difference between the employee's rate reported via the payroll software and the 0.5% rate. This credit will then show on the statement of account within ROS and reduce the employer's liability to revenue. And finally, I just want to quickly show you how to add or remove that EWSS marker in the payroll software. In Thesaurus Payroll Manager, you can add and remove the EWSS marker for all employees or on an individual basis. To do this individually, you can access the employees record within Add and Amend Employees. And first here, I need to select my employee. And now within the revenue details settings, you'll see a tick box here to indicate that you are registered for EWSS and this employee is being claimed for. And so to avail of the EWSS for this employee, simply tick the box, and going forward, the EWSS marker will appear on the PSR to revenue for this employee. Or if you have reviewed your eligibility and determined that you are no longer eligible, it's just a matter of unticking this box and again click on Update to save the changes. So that's the process for an individual employee, but as I mentioned, this can also be done in bulk. To add or remove the EWSS marker for all employees simultaneously, go to the EWSS menu and select Start Claiming EWSS for all employees or Stop Claiming EWSS for all employees, depending on your eligibility, and this will add or remove the EWSS marker for all employees on the selected pay frequency. Next, I want to show you this on Brightpay, and to add or remove the EWSS marker, you just need to go to the Employees tab, and again within the Revenue Details tab, like with the Thesaurus software, You simply need to tick that you wish to claim EWSS subsidy for this employee in this pay period, or untick the box if you want to stop claiming the EWSS subsidy for this employee. And I'll save the changes. As well as accessing this tick box in the Employees tab, you can also access it from the main payroll screen. So if I click on an employee, and at the right of the screen, you can choose Edit Settings. And you'll find the EWSS tick box here as well. So I'm going to pass you over to Holly again for the next section.
Thanks, Rachel. For the final part of today's webinar, we're going to look at top tips for managing employees as lockdown ends. As the lockdown restrictions continue to ease and more businesses prepare to reopen, employers and HR managers have a busy few months ahead. Between managing the safe return to the workplace, coping with the backlog of annual leave that employees have built up, and implementing vaccine policies, there will be a lot of work involved. So I'll start off first with communicating with employees. COVID-19 has been a turning point for many businesses to recognise just how beneficial flexible working can be. Therefore, in the long term, we are likely to see a big shift in the dynamics of the workplace, with many employees favouring to work a hybrid model of some days in the office and some days at home. But regardless of where the employee is working, regular communication is an essential way to help your teams adjust to the new working environment. Without it, your employees can feel disconnected, morale can dip, and priorities can become confused. With an online employer and employee portal, you can communicate directly with employees at the touch of a button. In our add-on products, Thesaurus Connect and Brightpay Connect, you will find a document upload feature, which ensures company documents are organized and that employees can securely access HR information anytime, anywhere. Sending this important information directly to the employee's phone is so much more powerful than simply sending a company-wide email. The click rate of a push notification is 7 times higher than that of email. And so Connect is a great way of communicating with employees when it comes to important updates. So just to explain Connect a little bit more, Connect is an optional add-on that works alongside both Brightpay Payroll and Thesaurus Payroll Manager. The payroll is still processed on the desktop application, but the payroll information is stored online on a secure cloud server. With Connect, you can benefit from automated cloud backups with a secure online portal for employers and employees, which you can use to access payslips, reports, HR documents, and manage employee leave. So going back to the employee communications, there are many useful COVID-19 documents that you can send to employees through Connect, including a COVID-19 response plan, detailing what steps you have taken to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in the workplace, a return to work form for employees to self-certify that they do not have COVID-19 symptoms or have not been in close contact with any confirmed or suspected cases over the last 14 days. Maybe you want employees to complete a returning to the workplace staff survey to help you identify any concerns that employees feel about coming back to work and potential gaps in your policy that need to be addressed. Information and guidance, for example, the signs and symptoms of COVID-19, guidance on staying at home and self-isolating if you do have symptoms, and information on how to get tested for COVID-19. You could also distribute information regarding the wage subsidy scheme and how it affects the employee. Other policies such as a working from home policy, a return to work policy, and a vaccine policy. Speaking of a vaccine policy, I'm going to look at this in a little bit more detail. Under the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act, it is the employer's responsibility to provide a safe working environment for their employees. Therefore, it is not unreasonable for an employer to want to have their workforce vaccinated. However, while individuals have been recommended to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, it is not mandatory in Ireland. While employers cannot force their employees to get vaccinated, they can emphasize the importance of the vaccine to their employees and that it would help to return to business as normal. Employers should also provide as much information from reliable sources, such as the HSE website, to educate and inform their employees. An employer may also highlight legitimate circumstances where vaccination is not recommended. Remember to be mindful and respectful of an individual's right to not avail of the vaccine and plan accordingly by offering alternative working arrangements where appropriate, and avoid any situation which may constitute discrimination, thus leading to legal issues. And just to let you know, our sister product, Bright Contracts, now includes a COVID-19 vaccine policy that applies to any business. This policy is in addition to the COVID-19 response plan and temporary working from home policy currently available on Bright Contracts. Back to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Holly. So the final part that we're going to cover today is managing the annual leave backlog. I think it's fair to say that the majority of employees have been saving their annual leave for when more lockdown restrictions have been lifted. Unfortunately for managers, this means that they are now in a situation where many employees are requesting to take leave at the same time. In some situations, employers may also have allowed employees to carry over annual leave from last year, which the employee is now entitled to on top of their normal leave entitlements. Where possible, managers should allow the leave. However, they also need to ensure business continuity. Therefore, it is important to balance the employee's request about the timing of the leave against the needs of the business. While it might not be possible to please everyone and give them their requested time off, it is important that you deal with annual leave requests in a way that is transparent and fair. To avoid the build-up of leave that employees will want to take when they're back at work, employers can require employees to take annual leave on dates chosen by the employer, provided the required notice is given. However, it is not recommended to force employees to take all of their annual leave entitlement, as the company must take into consideration the employee's health and well-being. By introducing Connect, employees can access a self-service smartphone and tablet app, and this is where they will be able to request leave anywhere, anytime, meaning they don't need to be in the workplace to request leave. Employees would also be able to view a payslip library, access HR documents, and view their annual leave calendar without needing to contact HR. When an employee requests leave, you will get a notification to log in to your online portal to approve or reject the leave. The most popular policy of granting annual leave is on a first-come, first-served basis, and with Connect, you can ensure that this fair method of approving leave is implemented as you will be able to see the order in which requests come in. You can also access a company-wide calendar displaying who is on leave and when to ensure adequate staffing levels before approving the leave request. So here you see there are 4 employees on leave on this particular day. Going back to the dashboard again, I just want to point out that HR managers should not be the only people involved in the leave management process. You should also involve department heads, line managers, and even team leads to relieve you of the admin burden. By delegating the responsibility among department managers, you can free up time to spend on other important HR tasks, such as introducing that vaccine policy. Department managers are likely to have a much better understanding of their project timelines and deadlines than the HR department. And so by allowing these managers to have control over the leave requests, they can better manage their team's schedule and workload. With Brightpay Connect and Thesaurus Connect, you can set up an unlimited number of users, each with their own user permissions. So for example, department managers can be set up so that they can only view employees within their department, but you can also limit their access so that they can only view the leave calendar and approve employee requests without having access to the payroll information or HR documents. So one last tab I want to point out here is the Documents tab. And as Holly mentioned, with Connect, you can upload any type of document or resource that you want to distribute to your employees. So for example, that vaccine policy, or here I've uploaded the likes of a contract of employment and a company handbook. You can also send notifications to employees and monitor the date and timestamp of when they accessed the resource or document. So it's a great way to communicate with your employees, but also to protect you as an employer. So I'm going to finish up there with the sales plug, but if you do want to find out more, we do run online demos of both the payroll software and the Connect add-on on a daily basis. So please let us know if you want to book onto one of our free demos. So that brings us to the end of the presentation today. And I know we have covered a lot on today's webinar, but we will send everyone an email later today. And this will include a copy of the slides and a link to the recording of today's webinar. So it's now time for the questions and answers. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the questions box, and we will try to get through as many questions as possible. As Holly mentioned earlier, however, we do have a lot of attendees logged on today, so unfortunately we won't have a chance to answer every single question, and I see a lot of questions have come in already. So for our questions, I'm joined by Audrey Mooney, who is our Customer Support Manager, and we also have Laura Murphy, who is our Chief HR Officer. So just bear with me here as I get the questions open on my screen. So the first question here is the EWSS weekly payment remaining the same as previously, i.e. the amounts being paid each week?
Hi, Rachel, and good morning, everyone. So yes, the amounts are staying the same. I suppose for Q3 of 2021, we don't know yet what will happen from the 1st of October, but certainly until September, the amounts will be the same.
Great. When is Revenue going to publish the up-to-date guidelines? What is on the website is still from the 31st of March 21.
Yeah, so this was mentioned on our call with Revenue last week, whereby they said that they were working on the guidelines and they expected them to be published this week. And I can see they're not up yet. We have another call tomorrow, so we should get an update then. But I'd say any day now they should be, they should be online.
Great. Does an employee returning to work with a reduced tax credit because of PUP payments cost the employer more in their employer contributions than before?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about this question, because the tax credit, I suppose, increases the tax that the employee pays and not the employer. The employer PRSI is still based on the same figure. I suppose what I'm wondering here, is this an employee who's on an agreed net pay? And if that is the case, then unfortunately, yes, it will cost an employer more. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why ourselves in Revenue don't really recommend, agreeing a net pay with employees.
Okay, great. If Revenue requested some payments during the TWSS, how do I show this on the reconciliation, as it does not appear on the payments section? I am sending in a few returns shortly, and 2 of them have this.
Yeah, so Rachel, I'm not sure if you covered this in your presentation, but I suppose payments that have been made to Revenue already for Twiz don't appear on the reconciliation summary. But once you accept the reconciliation, it will appear on the statement of account. So I suppose we feel that maybe it would have been better to include it, but they don't, unfortunately.
Brilliant. Someone is wondering here, is the 30% down on figures from 2020 or 2019?
Okay, so I suppose the change that was just recently announced for the extension of the scheme is that it's the full year of 2021 compared to turnover for the full year of 2019.
Okay. Is there an option to do partial payments against the TWSS, or does it have to be paid in full?
Okay, so I'm kind of assuming, but I may be wrong, but I'm assuming this is paying the liability on behalf of employees. So no, Revenue have said that you can pay, the liability or part of the liability, so it doesn't have to be all of it.
Okay, great. I have a childcare client finishing this week until the 25th of August. Is she still entitled to pay her 2 employees during July and August and claim EWSS while they're on holidays? And does the turnover check still not apply to the childcare sector?
Okay, yes, I suppose there's nothing in the EWSS guidelines that states employees must be working, while employers are paying them under the scheme. So that's fine. And the turnover check still doesn't apply to the childcare sector, at least until the end of Q3.
Okay, brilliant. Is there any information from Revenue with regards to settling the TWSS reconciliation over a few months?
Okay, I haven't heard of anything. So, once the 30th of June comes, I suppose they'll issue the statement of account. And at that stage, the liability will become due. So I think it's either that or the debt warehousing. I haven't heard anything else.
Okay, great. Thanks, Audrey. Ross says we did not provide all information on TWSS page, but we have uploaded files on the 24th of May 21 and the 4th of October 2020. What do we do now? It's not allowing me to accept the reconciliation.
Okay, so I think the only thing that I can advise here really would be to look at the reconciliation details CSV file. So Rachel, I think you touched on that during your presentation. So that goes through it in payslip level. So really you should look for just an unreported for an active payslip, because it could just be simply one payslip. So I suppose if you're using our software, maybe, and you can see what's unreported, maybe get in touch with us, but it could be just, as little as one payslip that hasn't been reported.
Okay, great. What is the last date you can hire a new employee and claim EWSS for them?
I'm not aware of a deadline here, Rachel. Yeah, I mean, new employees, can be paid under the scheme, provided they're not, the connected employees. So I'm not aware of any deadline in relation to that.
Yeah, okay. The next question here. My company only started to receive the EWSS from September 2020. Am I correct in assuming that the TWSS reconciliation does not apply to my company?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, the Twiz reconciliation is from, the 26th of March, isn't it, till the 30th of August. So it wouldn't apply to somebody that only availed of the EWSS.
Okay. If employers are paying employees income tax liabilities, do they include this payment as BIK in the payroll, and if so, which year?
Okay, so I'm assuming again this is the liability arising from Twiz. So this isn't subject to BIK. So I mean, Revenue have issued I suppose, information on that. So this money can be paid on behalf of the employees and isn't subject to BIK.
Okay. My employer's son is now employed by his company for the summer, as he was not employed previously. Is there any changes to him not being able to claim EWSS for the summer months? This would be available if it was an outside employee, which seems unfair as he is learning the trade and will continue to be employed during the summer holidays going forward.
Yeah, I suppose I'm not aware of any change to the connected employees. I mean, I feel the only change in the most recent, announcements was just for the period that we're looking back at. So I don't think there's been any change to connected parties. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and we see the guidelines just in case there has been.
Okay. If you use manual payroll CSV file cannot be prepared, how do I amend the liability?
Okay, so I'm assuming this is somebody who's doing their payroll on Ross. So I mean, on Ross, you can actually put in the, the subsidy figure. It could have been put in as the payroll was being done at the time. So if that wasn't done, I suppose the option would be to access those payslips in Ross now and enter that information.
Okay, great. Thanks, Audrey. I think I'll give you a bit of a break there. You've been answering questions all the time. Laura, I have a few questions for you here. Are employers liable to pay employees during working hours if they have to go get a vaccine?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I'll give Audrey a break. So no, there's no obligation on an employer to pay an employee when they are going off to get their vaccination. I suppose a trend that we've seen, and some employers are paying, rather than deducting employees in order to encourage employees to go and be vaccinated. If loss of pay during that period is kind of holding an employee back from going and getting the vaccination, some employers are just continuing on and not deducting pay. But it's a company decision. There's no obligation to pay.
Okay. And can you ask an employee if they have received the vaccine?
Yeah, this is a really topical question at the moment. I suppose ultimately whether or not you've had the vaccine is medical information. And as standard, employees they're not obliged to provide their employer with detailed medical information. So the same will very much go with regards to the vaccine. So at the moment, I'm saying no. I'd caution against asking employees for the whether or not they've had the vaccine. Now, an employee might volunteer that information to you, which is perfectly fine. And if that's what happened, I'd say to employers, it's not your role or your position to share that information with any other employee. Whether or not employee wants to share it themselves, it's not your role as an employer to share that. We are waiting on guidance from the Data Protection Commissioner on this subject, because obviously there is an argument to say, well, as an employer, I've health and safety obligations for the health of all my other staff, and I might need to know this. At the moment, we haven't received any further guidance from the DPC on it, so we stick with the caution of no, don't ask your employees at this stage.
Okay, great. Thanks, Laura. I have another one for you here. What is the correct leave notice employers must give employees?
Yeah, so if you want your employees to take annual leave, you must give them 1 month's notice.
Perfect. And does an employee accrue holiday from January 2021 to when they returned to work in May 2021? They were being paid a 4-day week, essentially 2 days by the EWSS and 2 days by the company.
So if an employee only accrues annual leave when they're working, so if they haven't been working, if they've no working hours, they won't have accrued annual leave. And there's a small exception for bank holidays where they'll accrue any bank holidays that fall in the first 13 weeks of the layoff. So there may be a couple bank holidays there for Easter that they would have entitlement to, but on the whole, annual leave they wouldn't have accrued. Now, if they're back working, just to say then as well, in the course of the year, if they reach the maximum limit of hours worked over the course of the year, if they've come back May to December, they may have reached that entitlement anyway. So you just might want to check the hours that they will have worked in the rest of the year.
Brilliant. Thanks, Laura. I see a few questions here asking about the slides for today's webinar and if they can have a copy of the handouts. So yes, these will be emailed out later today. They'll be sent out along with the recording of the webinar. So Audrey, I might come back to you again with a few questions.
Sure, thanks, Rachel.
So one of them here is, if a client has a balance owing to revenue and is a small business, will the balance be automatically placed on debt warehousing? They haven't been on debt warehousing before.
Okay, so my understanding, I suppose, is that it'll only automatically go to debt warehousing if the employer is already availing of it. So I do feel, but I could be wrong, I do feel that company would need to actually, I suppose, request, to avail of debt warehousing with revenue.
Okay, great. The next question here, what happens if the forecast proves to be incorrect?
Okay, so I suppose all you can do really is, it is a forecast, so you're doing your best. So I think just keep any documentation that you have, just to back up, I suppose, that finding at the time, and just keep that, and revenue would have to understand that, it was a forecast. So I think they'll be okay with that once you can prove, I suppose, how that, decision was made.
Brilliant. I'm using the Brightpay software, but don't have a tab for reconciliation CSV file. Please can you advise on what I should do? Maybe there's some update to the software available. If so, how will I find it?
Okay, I suspect that maybe this person is in the Brightpay 2021, where this, needs to be, I suppose, accessed in Brightpay 2020. So I think that's potentially the issue. But if not, I suppose we just give a call to support. But I'm guessing that's what it is.
Brilliant. I know I've made that mistake myself as well a couple of times. I process payroll for a single employer using Thesaurus Payroll Manager. However, in my raw screen, I do not have a TWSS option under the employer services. It has therefore been impossible for me to act on the TWSS reconciliation. Can you help clarify this situation, please?
Okay, so I suppose I'm wondering if this employer availed of Twiz. If they did, I suppose they should contact revenue, as soon as possible. I suppose asking why they don't have access to that, but perhaps they just didn't avail of Twiz.
Okay. And when is the deadline for employers paying TWSS tax for employees?
Okay, so that deadline was originally the 30th of June, but that was extended until the 30th of September. So that is the current deadline is the 30th of September.
Great. Just looking here for the next question. Can you please advise how the monthly EWSS is calculated if not working out at the weekly rates?
Okay, so I presume this is the subsidy being received by revenue, maybe. So I suppose essentially it's the weekly rates multiplied by 52 and divided by 12. So that's where the monthly figures come from.
Great. If staff are on a week one basis, should we recommend that they contact revenue and ask to go on a cumulative basis? And could this cause them a problem later?
I suppose this is probably somebody who perhaps was on the pandemic unemployment payment. So, revenue have put all of those participants on a week one basis. And they have said that they more than likely will stay on a week one until the end of the year. I suppose if somebody really wants to go on cumulative, if they ring revenue, they'll assess it and make a decision based on that. And I think, as part of that decision making, they would look at the consequences of doing that. And, they wouldn't do it unless it was okay to do.
Brilliant. If I want to stop receiving the EWSS, how would I go about that?
Okay, so I suppose if you no longer want to avail of EWSS, you would deregister with revenue. And then Rachel, I think you showed during your presentation how I suppose you, untick it within the software. So how you tell the software that you no longer want to claim it.
Brilliant. Laura, we have a few more employment law questions here. So the first one is, should you not be in a position to take an employee back who is off on the PUP? What are the redundancy status at the moment?
Okay, yeah, Rachel, I'll take that one. And so there's nothing to stop an employer if they feel they don't have work or can't take somebody back, or they feel they have a redundancy situation. There's nothing to stop an employer making an employee redundant at the moment. So if you have an employee who's had the 2-year service and is entitled to redundancy, and when you have that position, you can go ahead and make a redundancy following the correct processes. The change that we had in relation to redundancy, it's now been extended to the end of September, and that's in relation to employees requesting redundancy. So the normal legislation was if an employee was placed on layoff for a period of 4 weeks together, that they could request to be made redundant. That's been put on hold. It's been extended a couple of times. It's now that's been put on hold now till the 30th of September from an employee's perspective. But from an employer's perspective, if you have a redundancy situation, you can go ahead and proceed with that.
Great, thanks, Laura. If an employee does not return to work following maternity leave and then hands in their notice, are they entitled to holiday pay?
Yes, they would. Maternity leave is a protected leave, so annual leave continues to accrue during maternity leave. So yes.
Okay. And is an employee who works 1 day a week entitled to annual holiday?
Yes, so annual leave accrues on all hours worked, and it starts accruing immediately. So you're probably looking at 8% of hours worked, probably the calculation in that situation.
Brilliant. Audrey, I might come back to you now again. Regarding the question on accessing TWSS on ROS, if the person is not an administrator on the company ROS system, then they will not be able to access the reconciliation need to ask the administrator to download the information.
Okay, so that's just somebody else was commenting on, that question that we had. So that's a good point. It could be down to the type of digital search that the user has, and that's why they're not seeing it. So that's definitely, I suppose, one option. Yeah, so it's something to check.
Great. Someone's asking for confirmation. Did I just hear the TWSS reconciliation is extended until the 30th of September 2020? I think 2021.
No. Yeah, no, sorry. Twiz reconciliation deadline is still the 30th of June, but employers paying the Twiz liability on behalf of employees, that deadline has been extended until the 30th of September. Revenue are adamant the Twiz reconciliation deadline will not be extended. It's the 30th of June and that's it, unfortunately.
Great, that's good to know, Audrey. If an employer pays the TWSS tax bill for one employee, do they have to pay for all employees?
Okay, I suppose there's nothing there, from a revenue point of view to say that if they pay it for one, they have to pay it for all. I suppose the only exception is if they want to pay it for a proprietary director, they can only do that if they've paid it for all employees. Laura, I don't know if you want to come in here. If they were to pay it for one employee and not all, is there, I don't know, do you see any implications with that from an unfairness point of view? Or?
Well, I guess you'd be looking at your subjective criteria or objective criteria, and whether you'd be able to stand over as to why you paid for one person and not another. But yeah. You'd be in risky territory, I would say.
Yeah.
Great. The next question here is, can a company who has not previously applied for EWSS still apply now?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. So provided they, provided they're eligible, they can register now. Yeah, there's no problem.
Okay. There's another one here. Can the company pay the tax liability from the TWSS for directors? I think you've already touched on that there, Audrey.
Just touched on it. Yes, I mean, they can pay it for a proprietary director, but only if they've paid it for all other employees. Initially, it couldn't be paid for directors, and it was something that was challenged. So why they now allow for it, there's conditions attached. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm looking at the questions here. There's a lot of repeat questions coming in, so I'm not sure if there's anything else. Audrey or Vicky, or Audrey or Laura, do you see any questions coming in there that you want to take?
I think a lot of them we've already covered, Rachel, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so we'll finish up there for today, and we have hit the 11:30 time anyways. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. As I mentioned, we will send out a follow-up email later today with a link to the recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides as well. So hope you found it useful. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.